following is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. Alright, so here's something that's been keeping me up at night. Have you ever found yourself in one of those situations where you have to make a choice that just feels messy? Like not completely right, not completely wrong, just kind of stuck in the middle? Maybe you told a little white lie to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Or you bent a rule because deep down, you knew it was for the greater good. It's those moments where your heart's pulling you one way, but your brain's pulling you another. And honestly, it's so tough because you're left wondering, did I do the right thing? That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. This huge question that's been debated for centuries. Do the ends ever justify the means? Alright, let's start with a little scenario to get us thinking. Visualize this. You're walking down the street and you see someone completely glued to their phone, about to step into traffic. You've got two options. You could call out to them, risk embarrassing them, maybe even startling them, but you could save their life. Or you could stay quiet, respect their space, their autonomy, and risk them getting hurt. That's the heart of what we're talking about today. The constant tug of war between doing what feels right in the moment versus taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture. When philosophers talk about whether the ends justify the means, they're asking, does the outcome, the end, ever make a questionable or even flat out wrong action, the means, okay? Is it ever worth it to break a rule, to stretch a boundary, if it leads to something good in the long run? It's kind of like asking, if the destination is worth it, does that make the rough road you took to get there all right? But instead of travel, we're talking about morality. What's right, what's wrong, and how we figure that out. And here's the thing. This isn't just some abstract ivory tower debate for philosophers in classrooms. This question shows up in real life all the time. Think about it. When a politician promises to cut taxes, knowing it might mean tough budget cuts elsewhere, when a doctor has to decide whether to tell a patient the brutal truth or soften it to protect them, when a parent has to choose between being their kid's best friend or setting strict boundaries for their well-being, these aren't just theoretical, they're the tough choices we all face. And why does it matter so much? Because it forces us to think about what we believe. Are there some things that are always wrong, no matter the circumstances? Or does context, does the bigger picture, matter more than we sometimes want to admit? That's the messy, complicated, very human stuff we're looking into today. So please stick with me, because this one's worth taking the plunge. Let's take a little trip back in time and meet one of philosophy's most important and honestly most stubborn thinkers, Immanuel Kant. He was an 18th century German philosopher who had some pretty unshakable ideas about right and wrong. If you ever tried to tell him that the ends justify the means, he'd probably give you a look like, are you serious right now? For Kant, morality wasn't about picking the lesser of two evils or doing whatever feels right in the moment. Nope. He believed in something called the categorical imperative, which in plain English means that some things are always right or always wrong, no matter what. Think of it like a moral compass that never wavers, no matter how stormy the seas get. It points you to the same ethical true north, whether you like it or not. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky. According to Kant, lying is always wrong. Yep, even if you're lying to save someone's life. I know. On the surface, that sounds kind of heartless, but hear him out. Kant believed that when you lie to someone, you're basically deciding for them what they can and can't handle. You're stripping them of their ability to make their own informed choices, which, in his eyes, is a huge no-no. It's like you're saying, hey, I know better than you, or you're not capable of dealing with the truth. And for Kant, that's just not respecting someone's dignity as a rational, capable human being. Let's put this into a real-life scenario to see how this plays out. Picture yourself during the Holocaust, hiding Jewish families in your attic, and Nazi soldiers knock on your door, demanding to know if you're hiding anyone. I think most of us would agree that lying in this situation is not just acceptable, but morally right. Kant, he'd still say lying is wrong, even here. He'd argue that you should find another way, like refusing to answer, or finding some non-deceptive response. But flat-out lying would cross a moral line. I know this feels almost impossibly rigid, like, come on, Kant, really? But for him, the point was that once you start making exceptions based on outcomes, where do you stop? If lying to save lives is okay, then why not lie to spare someone's feelings? Or lie to land a promotion so you can take better care of your family? You can see how quickly the line blurs. Kant's view might feel harsh at times, but his message is clear. We should never treat people as mere tools to achieve our own goals. no matter how noble those goals might seem. Now let's flip the script and meet John Stuart Mill, a British philosopher who'd have some serious disagreements with Kant. See, Mill was what we call a utilitarian. That's a fancy way of saying he believed the morality of any action boils down to one thing: its consequences. For Mill, the right thing to do is always whatever action produces the most happiness for the greatest number of people. That's the heart of utilitarianism. And this is where the idea that the ends justify the means takes hold. Let's go back to that Holocaust example. Mill would say, without hesitation, that lying to save innocent lives isn't just allowed, it's morally required. In his view, saving those lives creates way more good in the world than stubbornly sticking to some abstract rule about always telling the truth. For Mill, the rule itself doesn't matter if following it leads to worse outcomes. It's the results that count. And honestly, a lot of us can probably relate to that kind of thinking, right? It feels pretty intuitive. When we face real-life moral dilemmas, we naturally tend to ask, what will happen if I do this or that? If telling a small lie prevents a bigger harm, Mill would say, do it. If breaking a rule helps more people than following it, then break the rule. Mill's framework permits us to be flexible, to consider the specific context we're in, and to focus on making the world better, even if that means bending the rules a bit. But here's where things start to get tricky. Mill's utilitarianism can also lead to some conclusions that might make you feel pretty uncomfortable. Take this, for example. If sacrificing one innocent person could save the lives of 10 others, then from a purely utilitarian perspective, that's the right call. The math works out. You save more lives overall. Or imagine a situation where a company hides the side effects of a drug to stay profitable and keep thousands of jobs safe. Even if a small number of customers are harmed, the utilitarian calculation might still say, yeah, that's the better choice. And that is why these kinds of moral questions are so complex. No matter which approach you take, whether it's sticking rigidly to moral rules, like Kant would, or judging everything by the outcome, like Mill does, you can end up in situations that just feel wrong. It's messy, it's complicated, and there's no easy answer. The tension between these two moral approaches, thinking about the consequences versus sticking to principles, shows up everywhere in our world today. And I think it helps to walk through some real-life examples to see just how complicated this can get. Let's start with one of the most debated decisions in modern history: the US dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki back in 1945. President Truman and his advisors faced an almost impossible choice. They could either launch a full-scale invasion of Japan, which could have cost hundreds of thousands of American and Japanese lives, or use these new, devastating weapons that would kill civilians but might end the war much more quickly. If you look at it from a utilitarian perspective, you might argue that dropping the bombs was justified because, in the end, it likely saved more lives than it took. The projected casualties from a ground invasion were staggering, and every day the war dragged on meant more deaths all across the Pacific. But if you look at it through a Kantian lens, you hit a hard wall. Targeting civilians, people just trying to live their lives, treats them as a means to an end, not as full, autonomous human beings. That violates a core moral principle. You should never treat people as mere tools for achieving your goals. And what makes this so much harder is the uncertainty. We'll never know for sure what would have happened if they hadn't dropped the bombs. Maybe Japan would have surrendered anyway. Maybe the invasion wouldn't have been as deadly as they thought. We're often forced to make these huge moral choices based on incomplete information, and that's part of what makes ethical decision-making so tough. Let's bring it closer to the present with an example you've probably heard of: Edward Snowden. Back in 2013, Snowden was a contractor for the NSA, and he discovered just how much the US government was surveilling its citizens. He faced a classic moral dilemma: break his oath of secrecy and risk being labeled a traitor, or stay silent and let what he saw as unconstitutional surveillance continue unchecked. Snowden decided to leak the documents. From his point of view, the ends, exposing government overreach and sparking a national conversation about privacy, justified the means of breaking the law. His supporters argue that he sparked important reforms and brought transparency to practices the public didn't know about. His critics argue that he jeopardized national security and should have worked through proper legal channels instead of taking matters into his own hands. This case captures the heart of the debate. Was Snowden a hero who sacrificed his freedom for the greater good, or a traitor who put his own moral beliefs above the law? Your answer probably depends on whether you lean more toward utilitarian, outcome-focused thinking like Mill's, or Kantian, rule-based ethics. Let me give you one more example that might hit a bit closer to home. Imagine you're a doctor treating a patient with terminal cancer. The patient looks you in the eye and asks, "Am I going to die?" You know that if you tell them the hard truth, they might lose hope and their condition could worsen. But if you soften the blow, or even lie, they might have more time left and possibly a better quality of life. What do you do? A Kantian approach would say you have to tell the truth. Lying violates their dignity and autonomy. They have a right to know the truth about their own life. But a utilitarian might argue that if a gentle lie or a carefully worded truth helps the patient live longer or suffer less, that's the better moral choice. And here's the thing, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Different doctors might make different decisions, all genuinely trying to do the right thing. But we also have to be careful, because both of these approaches, whether it's justifying means by ends or sticking rigidly to moral rules, can lead us down dangerous paths. Let's talk about the risks of the utilitarian mindset for a moment. If we say the ends can justify the means, where do we draw the line? History is full of people who committed terrible acts while claiming they were serving a greater good. Dictators have justified horrific violence in the name of progress. Corporations have hidden harmful side effects because they believed that protecting jobs and the economy mattered more. Governments have restricted freedoms, arguing it was necessary for security. If we always prioritize outcomes over principles, how do we avoid slipping into dangerous rationalizations? On the flip side, a rigid Kantian approach has its pitfalls. Life is messy. Sometimes, following moral rules without flexibility leads to outcomes that just feel wrong. If you refuse to lie to save someone's life, say refusing to lie to Nazis about hiding Jews during World War II, can you say you acted morally when your honesty leads to innocent deaths? If you always tell the blunt, brutal truth to your patients, even when it crushes their hope, are you acting ethically? This is where another perspective might help. Virtue ethics. Instead of focusing solely on rules or outcomes, virtue ethics asks a different question. What would a good person do? It's about character, cultivating traits like compassion, courage, honesty, and wisdom. A virtue ethicist might say that the doctor facing that tough conversation should think not just about rules or outcomes, but about what a wise, compassionate, caring doctor would do in that moment. Maybe the answer isn't a strict yes or no, but finding a way to be honest that also respects the patient's emotional well-being. Let me leave you with a thought experiment to challenge your thinking. Imagine you have the power to stop a terrorist attack that would kill thousands of innocent people, but the only way to do it is to torture someone who you believe has information about the plot. This person hasn't been convicted of a crime. There's even a small chance they might be innocent. Do you do it? This is the real tension between these ethical frameworks. If you say yes, you're accepting that sometimes extreme ends can justify extreme means, but at the cost of violating individual rights and moral principles. If you say no, you're standing by the belief that some actions are always wrong, no matter the consequences, but you're also accepting that innocent people might die because you refuse to act. There's no easy answer here, and that's the point. These moral frameworks aren't about giving us simple solutions. They're tools to help us think more deeply about what we believe, why we believe it, and how we want to live. They help us challenge our assumptions and test whether our moral reasoning holds up. So where does that leave us? After exploring Kant's duty-based ethics, Mill's focus on outcomes, real-world examples, and the risks of both extremes, what can we say about whether the ends justify the means? Honestly, I think it depends, but not in a vague, wishy-washy way that avoids taking a stand. It depends on our values, on the situation, and on how we weigh different moral concerns. Some of you might feel strongly that certain principles should never, ever be broken, no matter what. Others might believe that flexibility is essential, that sometimes the greater good does justify bending the rules. For me, after all this reflection, I find myself leaning toward a middle path. I think some actions, like torture or murder, are wrong no matter the potential benefits. But I also think context matters, and that sticking rigidly to rules without considering the real-world consequences can lead us into moral blind spots. We need both principles and flexibility, and we need to think carefully about how we balance them. So, what about you? Have you ever faced a tough decision where you had to choose between following a moral principle and pursuing a better outcome? How did you make that choice? And how did it feel afterward? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy these kinds of careful study into philosophy and big questions, I hope you'll subscribe and hit the notification bell because we've only just begun. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole exploration. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep exploring the big ideas that shape our world.